Welcome to the deep dive. You know, when we think of the 1920s in America, it's often jazz, flappers, maybe the booming economy that comes to mind.
Right, the Roaring Twenties image.
Exactly. But there's another side to it, evidence of something darker, a kind of growing intolerance.
hmm A definite undercurrent.
So today, that's what we're diving into, the social, the political stuff happening after World War I, trying to understand this rise in intolerance.
Yeah, our mission, if you like, is to unpack the key signs, the indicators of that shift in the post-war U.S.
It's important because, as you said, the Roaring Twenties weren't roaring for everyone, had a real sharp edge.
Absolutely. And to really get it, we need to nail down some terms, some key ideas and events from that time.
Okay, good idea. Like building a shared vocabulary before we really dig into the evidence itself. Where should we start? Communism.
Let's start there. Communism. Okay, so in simple terms, it's this political and economic idea. The core concept is that the community owns things together.
Things like factories.
Exactly. Not individuals. So no private property, ideally, and the wealth is shared.
And historically, pushing for that often meant big changes.
Big changes, often revolution, or at least the idea of it. A complete overhaul of how things were run.
Okay, shared ownership, potential upheaval. Got it. That kind of sets the stage for the next term. The Red Scare.
It does.
What exactly was so scary about the red part?
Well, the Red Scare was this period right after World War I of just intense fear in the U.S., fear of communism primarily.
But other radical ideas, too.
Yeah, other ideas that seemed to challenge the American system. It wasn't just a little worry. It was like a widespread panic
Panic about what specifically?
that communism would spread here to the U.S. and maybe even, overthrow the government. Really shaped how people reacted to a lot of different things.
Oh, okay, nationwide fear of takeover. That sounds intense. And this fear, it led to government action, didn't it? Like the Palmer raids?
Absolutely. The Palmer raids. These were actions by the U.S. Department of Justice. The Attorney General then was A. Mitchell Palmer.
And what were they doing?
So, fueled by this Red Scare panic, they went after people they suspected of being radicals, communists, anarchists,
Suspected, so not always based on proof.
often with very little evidence, yeah. They arrested huge numbers of people. Sometimes they tried to deport them just based on their political beliefs.
That raises some serious questions about civil liberties, doesn't it?
It really does. It shows how fear can push government actions into difficult territory.
So the government rounding up suspected radicals, you mentioned anarchists were among those targeted. What did they believe?
Right, anarchists. They basically believe that government itself is the problem.
No government at all.
No government. They envisioned a society based more on, say, voluntary cooperation, individual freedom, no central authority telling you what to do.
So very different from communism, but still seen as radical.
Exactly. During the Red Scare, they often got lumped together with communists seen as dangerous threats to stability.
Yeah.
It's a fundamentally different view of society.
A radical idea, for sure. Now, there's a really famous and pretty tragic case from this time involving alleged anarchists, Sacco and Vanzetti.
Ah, yes. Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti.
Who were they, and why is their story still such a big deal?
Well, they were two Italian immigrants living in the U.S., and they were also known anarchists.
Okay.
They were accused and then convicted of robbery and murder in Massachusetts. But it was, and still is, incredibly controversial.
Why controversial? Doubts about the evidence?
Significant doubts. Many people at the time, and historians since, believed they were targeted less for the crime and more because they were immigrants with radical political views.
So prejudice played a role.
It certainly seemed to. Their trial, their eventual execution, it became this huge symbol of the suspicion, the prejudice, aimed at immigrants and radicals in the 1920s. Makes you really think about bias in the justice system.
A really stark example of those underlying tensions. Okay, let's shift gears slightly to another disturbing thing happening then. The return of the Ku Klux Klan.
Yes, the KKK's resurgence.
And this wasn't just the same Klan from after the Civil War, was it? It was different somehow.
That's a really crucial point. The 1920s Klan was different. Yes, their hatred and violence towards African Americans was still absolutely central, but their target list got much bigger. They also went after immigrants, Catholics, Jews, basically anyone they didn't see as fitting their definition of true American.
Which was what, exactly?
They presented themselves as defenders of, quote, traditional American values, which to them meant white Protestant supremacy. Their core ideology was fear and prejudice against a much wider group.
And they were widespread.
Shockingly so, in some places. Their membership grew quite large, which tells you something about the level of, well, societal acceptance or at least tolerance for their hateful ideas back then.
Wow, so a much broader campaign of hate feeding on different anxieties. And a lot of this seems tied to nativism. What does that term mean here?
Nativism, yes, basically a strong preference for people born in the United States. And alongside that, often a dislike, a fear or suspicion of immigrants.
So native-born Americans are seen as better.
Or more entitled, yeah,
Yeah.
that kind of thinking. In the 1920s, this feeling was really powerful. It shaped public opinion, influenced government policy. It's that us versus them mentality.
A very divisive idea. And you mentioned it influenced policy. This leads to the quota system, right?
Correctly. The quota system refers to laws, actual laws passed by Congress in the 1920s.
What did these laws do?
They put strict limits quotas on how many immigrants could come into the U.S. each year from specific countries.
And were these quotas applied equally?
No, not at all. They were specifically designed to cut way back on immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe and also Asia,
While favoring.
while favoring immigrants from Northern and Western European countries. It was a
Yeah.
direct result of nativist ideas about preserving a certain ethnic and racial mix in America. Prejudice written into law.
Prejudice written into law. That's a powerful way to put it. Okay, so we have these concepts. Red Scare, Palmer Raids, anarchists, Sacco and Vanzetti, the KKK, nativism, quota system. Let's connect the dots now. How do the Red Scare and Palmer Raids show this growing intolerance?
Well, they show how fear of ideas, communism, anarchism led directly to persecuting people based on belief. And crucially, many targeted were immigrants.
So it links fear of radical ideas with anti-immigrant feelings.
Exactly. There's a clear link there. The government claimed national security, but the effect was an atmosphere of suspicion, violation of rights, aimed squarely at people seen as outsiders with un-American views. It wasn't just the ideas, it was who was thought to be bringing them.
So being an immigrant with the wrong beliefs made you doubly suspect. Which brings us back to Sacco and Vanzetti. Their case really highlights this, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It's such a disturbing example of how that nativist prejudice, that fear of radicals, could seemingly poison the justice system itself.
The belief they were convicted unfairly.
Yes, the widespread belief they were convicted because they were Italian immigrants and anarchists, maybe more than because of solid evidence. It just underscores the deep intolerance in society then.
It suggests justice wasn't blind.
It could be swayed by bias against certain groups, and the huge outcry over their case shows that people recognize this prejudice, even if it wasn't enough to save them.
A really chilling thought. Okay, now, the Ku Klux Klan. Their resurgence and expanded list of targets. What does that tell us about intolerance in the 20s?
It's a huge indicator. The fact that they revived, first of all, and then broadened their hate campaign beyond African Americans to immigrants, Catholics, Jews.
That reflects wider anxieties.
Yes, their open prejudice, their violence, their intimidation tactics, and like I said, their surprisingly large membership in places. It all points to a wider acceptance or maybe a lack of strong enough opposition to these hateful ideas.
So they were tapping into existing fears.
Exactly. Tapping into fears about demographic change, maybe loss of traditional values, economic worries, and channeling all that into hatred against specific groups. Their rise wasn't in isolation. It reflected and amplified prejudices already there.
Exploiting divisions. And then the quota system. This wasn't just attitudes. This was the government itself acting on this intolerance.
Precisely. The quota system is, concrete proof. Legislative evidence. The government acted on nativist feelings.
By setting those limits based on where people came from?
Yes. Creating this hierarchy of preferred and less preferred groups based purely on national origin. It basically slammed the door on many people just because of where they were born.
It shows how deep that prejudice ran if it became federal law.
Right. Laws reflect societal values or prejudices. The quota system is a stark, undeniable example of that in the 1920s.
Okay, so let's try to pull this together as we wrap up. What are the key pieces of evidence we've looked at that really scream growing intolerance in the 1920s?
Well, we saw the Red Scare and Palmer Raids, driven by fear of radical ideas, often targeting immigrants and trampling civil liberties.
Right.
We looked at the Sacco and Vanzetti case as a tragic example of how anti-immigrant bias and fear of radicalism could potentially corrupt justice. Then, the resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan, with its broader hate agenda and significant following, showing widespread prejudice.
And finally,
And finally, the quota system, Actual laws, discriminatory policies enacted by the government based on nativism.
So not just scattered incidents, it's like a perfect storm. Widespread fear, organized hate groups, and government action all pointing the same way.
Exactly. It paints a much more complex and, frankly, unsettling picture of the decade than just jazz and prosperity.
It really does. It shows that beneath the surface shimmer, there were deep anxieties and divisions.
That's right. These fears of radicalism, of foreigners, deep-seated racial and religious prejudices, they fuel this rising intolerance. And these trends, they left a lasting mark on American society.
A mark we're still dealing with in discussions about civil rights, immigration, social justice today.
Definitely. It's a powerful reminder that times of big social and economic change can also stir up significant tension and division.
Absolutely. Well, as we finish this deep dive, we always like to leave our listeners with a few things to think about. So maybe ask yourself, can you explain in your own words what the Red Scare was and what kind of actions did the government take then?
And how did that Sacco and Vanzetti case really reflect the social tensions of the 1920s?
Also, who were the main targets of the KKK in the 1920s, and what does their comeback tell us about that whole era?
And finally, how did that quota system show this growing nativism in the U.S.?
Good questions to reflect on.
And maybe one last thought to mull over. We've talked about these specific forms of intolerance in the 1920s: fear of beliefs, anti-immigrant prejudice, organized hate. How might similar underlying fears and prejudices show up, perhaps in different ways, in our world today?
That's definitely something worth thinking about.